because Africa too can do it. I don't think we can accept to remain this exception, right? Other people are growing. Now they're saying this century will be the Asian century, and Africans are just watching people passing by. I think we need to work on confidence, but also discipline and start moving towards making this a reality. You can see I feel strongly.
Dr. Laila, Video 1, CTA.
Super excited to have each and every single one of you back here watching. We are back like a vertebrate. We are excited. We are honored. Let me say this. We have an ambitious goal this year to do 100 leadership conversations, and everything already seems to be aligning. So by this time, 2025, December 31st, we would have sat down with 100 leaders in different industries. Leadership is a huge problem across the globe. And in this country, we've got very many amazing leaders. And it is my job to present them to you so that you guys can get a different narrative on leadership, so that I, myself, can learn about leadership. Guys, today's guests, let me tell you, get yourselves ready. Wherever you are, get yourselves ready. Whenever it is that you're watching this, some of you are watching this over Christmas, Merry Christmas. Some of you are going to be watching this in the new year, Happy 2025. Some of you are going to be watching this at different times and different seasons. I just want to say it is going to be an honor and privilege, and you're going to be extremely blessed by the conversation that we're about to have here. This is one that you give to different generations to watch. This is one that you watch with the family. This is one that you watch as an organization. This is one that you watch because the value that is going to be unleashed in this CTA is one that is going to be memorable. We are extremely honored and privileged for this. To the point where I decided to write down this, because I needed to just give you guys a little taste of something. So listen to this. Welcome to today's conversation, where we have the honor of speaking with Dr. Laila Macharia, a trailblazing lawyer, business leader, and angel investor, whose influence spans across Kenya and beyond. With a remarkable career that bridges continents, Laila has left her mark in diverse fields such as law, urban development, and private equity, while also serving on boards of prominent organizations like Absa Bank Kenya PLC, Semtel Investments, and the Africa Digital Media Group. From her groundbreaking role as founder CEO of Sycon Real, we're going to find out if I've pronounced that right a bit later, to her pivotal contributions at MPESA, where she championed progressive reforms for Kenya's private sector, Laila continues to push boundaries. Her dedication to fostering economic development, empowering women, and reshaping industries is as impressive as her academic credentials, which include a doctorate of law from Stanford and a teaching portfolio that spans top institutions like Princeton University. Then after that, just add a ... because there's so much more that I found that I couldn't compress into this intro. But what do I want to say? I want to say what we normally say on CTA. You never truly know people until you take the time out to get to know people. And that's what we're about to do now. So ladies and gentlemen, I've got my main man, Aizo and Wamai with me. Put your hands together for none other than Dr. Laila Macharia.
What fun.
I hope I did some justice to that intro. Let me start by asking you, Doctor, is it Laila or is it Laila?
The name is Laila.
The name is Laila.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the name. There's something that you told me off camera that I want people to hear.
Yes. So Laila means night or dark as night. There's Layla, which many people are familiar with, which is the Arabic version.
Yeah.
But Laila is the Hebrew version of the same name. So it means the main thing, same thing.
First, let me say thank you so much for coming to CTA. As you heard me say, we're in a season of unleashing and educating people about leadership. And I think you're the epitome. You completely represent the conversation that we're having. So when we got talking and you agreed to come onto the platform, I just felt like, how can the ducks align like this? How good is God? My one request is this. can I please put down the doctor title just for the bit? Just a bit in the story. And I'm doing it because I want some people to understand the journey that she took to get that title. I'm not doing it out of lack of honor. I am doing it completely with the honor, but I want the audience to understand the journey it's taken, where you've come from.
Yes.
You know, when you're
That's
born, you're not born
fine.
Dr. Laila.
That's true. That would be awkward. Yeah, great.
Me and you having a conversation. When you want to stop, we will stop. When you want to, whatever it is that you want to do, just let me know. Feel free, feel relaxed. Let's jump into this.
Great.
This is the research. So basically, I want to start this from the very beginning. And the first question is, when and where were you born? Let's get into it.
Yes, so I was born in Nairobi to a Nairobi family. And this was in 1970, at a time when the country had come out of independence and was now really finding its feet as a nation. And I was born to a really special family, to parents who had a very strong heart for nation building. My father, David Macharia, was a geographer and a person who worked in adult education, so a very strong heart for education. And he ended up being the director of adult education for Kenya, which meant after independence, there was a lot of people who didn't have a chance to go to school, hadn't had a chance to go to school. But now in this newly independent nation, you have all these adults. So there was a program called, people called it Gumbaru, that sent all these adults back to work, back to school to become literate. It had an impact on very many families. And then my mother was an economist, is an economist. Her name is Helen Macharia. She's a brilliant economic mind, mathematician, and she's basically ended up being an economist, but we can talk more about them later because this combination has a lot to do with how I ended up being who I am, as it is with everybody.
Wow.
Yeah.
First of all, I can feel the goodness of this security oozing out. I love how you articulate the different stories in your life. I want to just take a little bit here about your dad. And adult education, I've never heard of that, and I love the fact that you're talking about, explain more about his role in educating a nation, literally.
Oh, it's a beautiful story. So what happened is that, as I said, after coming through independence, a lot of people had missed a chance to go to school. So we get independence as Kenya, and now we have these big, ambitious plans. And we'll talk more about that generation later. Very special lot. So after that, the government decides we have to go back. We can't say this is a lost generation. They never got educated. They don't know how to read. We'll leave them like that. Instead, what they did is they designed, and this was under Moi's government, he created a Department of Adult Education. My father was the inaugural director, and they basically went out and created centers around the whole country and started teaching people how to read. Old women, people who hadn't had education. And there's many families that when my father passed on a few years ago during the COVID time, we had families coming up and saying, we remember Gumbaru, thank you. My grandmother learned to read so that she could read the Bible. She put in her time so that she'd be able to read the word. And this was a very powerful thing because, as you know, when your family is able to read, and especially if you have mothers that are literate and educated, it has an impact down generations. So there's families whose entire trajectory changed once Gumbaru was rolled out. So we're very proud of that. After that, he became a peace educator and activist, and he was actually given a role to go to Somalia and do the same thing with them. Later, he went to Namibia and set up the adult education department there as well. Yeah. And also an association of adult literacy workers across the entire continent of Africa. So they have an association that does that. So really trying to bring people who haven't had the same chances maybe you or I have had to have an early education, then bridge that gap later, remediate, and help them start again on the right path.
You know, because I've got the honor of having you on this seat, I'm going to try and milk as much as I can just to empower people. Yeah. That may have been the situation at that time. In 2024, that sounds like reskilling or retooling. It's fixing a gap, but now in a different generation.
That's right.
It's not that there are no opportunities today. Yeah. For young people to capture. It's just that they sort of need to do what your father was doing to that generation.
To be ready for a new time. Exactly. So at that time, I mean, now we've come a long way since those days. Of course, now there was free primary education. We can debate about the quality, but the fact is, Kenyans' literacy is now at over 70%. At that time, it was much, much lower.
Whoa.
Yeah, so now most people have a primary education, but you're right, we do still have a challenge, especially when they've come through. So there's some people who still don't end up getting to Form 4. That group, we call them the opportunity youth. Yeah, that's the name we have for them. So there's some people who are underemployed or in informal employment who don't want to be. So there's special programs for that. But we have another issue where even after people have done Form 4 or even gone to university, sometimes the education they have is not tightly relevant for their time or for the needs of the market. And there's a whole lot of work we have to do for that. And that's the work I've ended up in. So you can see this legacy of education and kind of, it's something that I've inherited and continue to build on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, this one's going to be worth your time. Now let's come back to you.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your family context. Are you the firstborn? Are you the lastborn? Are there any boys? Are there any girls? Let's talk about that. And where in Nairobi are you living at this time also?
Yes, so I'm the firstborn. Born to two firstborn. So my father was a firstborn, my mother was a firstborn. And then I have a brother who's 2 years younger and a sister who's 6 years after that, so 8 years younger. My brother lives in the US. He's an engineer there and he's married there. He lives in Houston. And then my sister is in the UN.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me then a little bit now about where you live in, explain the time and your childhood era.
Yeah. So when I was a child, I grew up in Nairobi. And I say we're really Nairobi people. And why I say that is because when we were coming up in those days, the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of pressure to say you were from someplace else. So it used to be that if you say, you know, I live in Kileleshwa or I live wherever I live, then people would say, yeah, but where are you really from, right? So there was this real pressure to kind of affiliate yourself with a rural area and also with a tribe. And this has changed a lot now. But in those days, a lot of people were migrants and they saw Nairobi. In fact, I wrote an article called Nairobi is Home quite a while back because you kind of had to push back if you were from Nairobi and kind of justify yourself. And part of that was because people thought maybe you're ashamed of your rural background or you're trying to downplay, you know, your shags part, which we all have. But it wasn't that. There were actually some people who were born here and were born to people who are from here largely. So for me, I was born in Nairobi Hospital. My mother was born in Nairobi as well. Her father had migrated to Nairobi at a time when, in about 1920, and lived in the mean streets of Nairobi and built a life there. And over time, then eventually married somebody, went back to his rural area, married somebody, and had his family, which he kind of raised here. It's more of a story because then colonialism and the emergency kicked in and it got more complicated, as it did for many Kenyan families. But then that means that coming up, we lived in different Nairobi neighborhoods. There was one time when we lived in Karen on a farm. There was a time we lived in Lavington after that. And at this time, with my family of choice, not my family of origin, we live in the Kileleshwa area.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm relating to your story so much. Sometimes when I tell people I'm going to Shags, my Shags is Nairobi. For real.
Yeah, and now it's more legitimate. I mean, there's been another generational change, but there's a time when even on your ID, they would try and force you to pick a place, even if you didn't know the place very well. But now, fortunately, we are able to own our identity and be more authentic about who we are. I also always say that, and I tell this to everybody, no matter your background, nobody should ever be shamed for who they are or who their background is. Whether you're from Shags and you have a strong accent, whether you're from, your ancestors were, you know, whatever it is, and the same, even if you're from Nairobi and you grew up in Nairobi, I mean, people can tease you and say, you know, Nairobi Babi or whatever, but who you are, you should be proud of your background, you should tell your story authentically, and all of us have something to bring to the table. So I always say that never let people downplay who you are or where you're coming from, and I try to make that true for everybody I interact with.
Hey, I'm enjoying this already. So tell me a little bit about what's the family unit like? As you clearly said, father figure, mother figure father and mother play such a pivotal role in the life of somebody. You can, when I start CTA, I started from this very beginning because I know this story plays on throughout. So tell me about growing up.
So growing up, my mother was a professional. She was an economist, as I explained. She's at that time, and a remarkable woman. She was actually the first head of foreign exchange in Kenya post-independence. She used to report directly to the governor at the CBA, at the CBK, and really worked together with other heads to kind of be that first generation that brought the CBK into kind of our independence era. So she's a very senior female banker and quite a trailblazer. And at that time, of course, they were professionals, but there was quite a few challenges, not just for professionals generally, but specifically for female professionals. But she did a fantastic job. And so I grew up with a professional mother, and that was my experience. And so it's very normal for me to grow up in a house where I would say the parents are true partners. They support each other professionally. My mother used to travel. Sometimes she'd be in Malta. Sometimes she'd be in Japan. She was a global fellow of the World Bank. So that means that she had to travel sometimes, but really made a contribution to the country. And then my father was in adult education, and coming up, he was teaching at the University of Nairobi for over 30 years on the faculty. And then they would second academicians into the public service, which is how he ended up working in government for a while. Okay. But what's important about the environment is that this was a generation that really believed in Kenya. They really believed in Africa too. There was a Pan-African vision. You know, Kwame Nkrumah and others had really told the story of what Africa could be on the world stage. And so as they went into their professions, they went into it with a real heart for service. And the idea at that time was whether or not you're in government, whether or not you're in business, you could be in civil service, there was in civil society, everybody was building a country towards a vision. And they had a real determination to show that African countries could be and could flourish. And so this really created I would say an ethos around how we build country, how we contribute to the nation. And nobody felt like they were floating off on their own. And so for that reason, I really feel that they were a special generation that pulled something together. But that ethos is something I feel we could really continue to bring down, where people feel we're pulling together to deliver. We believe. So one thing is to serve, and it's quite another to have faith that we're building something that's for future generations. And they really did that. So that's very much a tone in the house, right? Like we're building something here, we're working hard. Exactly. Yeah. We're doing something here and everybody must do their part. So that was there. Then the other thing about the household is a very strong sense of family values. So having dinner together, in the evening. In those days, like many people of that time, there wasn't that much TV. It started at 5 p.m., one channel, black and white. Some of the programming was for some people, but not others. It's much later that now this revolved. Of course, in our lifetime, we've seen a lot of technological change, but in theirs, it was really night and day to the kinds of things they're dealing with now compared to where they started. Yeah.
Oh man, there's something you've just said there. You have your foot in both worlds. BC, before computers, and AD, after digital.
Yeah.
So it's a very unique, you have seen telephone,
yes,
the ones
that's true.
Dial up.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen the internet come in all the way until where we are.
Yeah.
So you have seen change happen.
Yeah.
And not just from a digital perspective, even from a national perspective.
Yes, that's right.
This thing that you're talking about, the ethos of the country, and I mean, that just came into my head. Kenya, I'm like, how come we don't have many? What's made us lose that, and how do we get it back?
Yeah.
With you, can I just throw random questions?
Yes, you can, please. And this, I can talk about this one all day. But yeah, I think we need to, without a vision, the people perish.
Oh.
So the first thing is we need to bring back our vision. Now, of course, there is a vision. There's Kenya Vision 2030. The clock is ticking, right? But the fact is we have sat through a very elaborate project and process to say what is it that we want Kenya to look like. And in that plan, we have economic pillar, we have social pillar, we have political pillar. We even said what the foundation was going to be as far as software, right? As far as the values of the people. Kenyans already know what kind of society we want to live in, what we want to be able to count on our neighbor for. You know, the person next door, even if they're a stranger, the kind of societal trust we want to encompass us as a, you know, almost like a hug, right? So we feel that we're very clear on what values we want. And there's a process of formation when we're bringing our kids into what our values. You cannot, and they used to say it was the church, you know, it was school, it's the family. That's where we form people, right? So we can, and I would say media is the fourth, right? Like media also really influences how young people come up, and even old people, how you continue to make your way in the world. I think, so the first thing is the vision. We really need to get back to a place where we reconfirm to each other and recommit to each other that this is what we want our nation to be, and that we're not going to accept anything less, right? Because it's one thing to say this is aspirational and then accept something that's not there. And it's quite another to say, no, we are going to say we deserve this, we want this, and we can do this, we're capable. So I think that process of giving people the confidence that as Africans and as Kenyans, we can do this is the second bit. So it's one thing to have the vision and to align around the vision. We also created an elaborate constitution where a lot of people gave their voices, and we designed something that was to serve. And indeed, we're testing it every day. But then the next bit is the confidence. And there's a mindset that we really need to get and that we need to work on to get people to be confident and to say we can do this. There's a feeling that many have that it's okay, if you're African, it's okay to live under corruption. If you're African, it's okay to live with no lights, bad roads, you know, healthcare that is not delivering for us, even as you're paying your taxes. And I think we need to say, no, we deserve better than this, and we believe we can do this. So that's the second bit. And then after that, once you have the mindset in place and a vision, the rest is execution. And there's all kinds of ways where we can align to make sure that we make this country what it can be and become a role model for our continent, because Africa too can do it. I don't think we can accept to remain this exception, right? Other people are growing. Now they're saying this century will be the Asian century, and Africans are just watching people passing by. I think we need to work on confidence, but also discipline, and start moving towards making this a reality. You can see I feel strongly.
That is so brilliant. You know what I mean? Oh, I'm just here staring at you like,
no, we can do this.
You just let those words out of your mouth.
Yeah, but we're really punching below our weight. We can do much better than this.
Anyway, let's continue the story. We're definitely going to touch on these different nuggets as the story continues, but I want to get to know more about you. Were you guys tight as kids?
We are very tight. We've always been, and we still are. We're few, which helps, because I understand in large families, factions create, you know, people become camps. But with us, we're very, very close. And that's also partially, as you know, we're just 5, right? So as a family, we're very tight. But it's something you have to work on and prioritize. And it's a culture you create. It doesn't just happen because of blood. It's something where you create rituals. You also create a culture of telling the truth. We have something called the Family Forum, where at the end of the year, you sit together and you kind of say, this is where I am, this is how I'm assessing different areas of my life, but the end is how you can help me with where I'm trying to go in the coming year. So learning to be vulnerable, especially when things are tough, is a big discipline.
Is this happening when you are kids?
It has developed over time.
Okay, but I'm just like, what perfect dad is this?
It's
so intentional.
So in those times, it used to be. This is what now the culture of the family has become over time, and I would say this has happened, you know, for a very long time, especially after people left home and we were coming together. But growing up, it was mostly a very big emphasis on education. Quite a bit of discipline as well. Of course, in that generation, that was very normal, right? So you run things in a kind of orderly way. People in our family, there was quite a philosophy around how to interact with, there was people helping us in the house. But I remember in the early years, my mother said that children should not address kind of people who are helping you. Like, you don't say, get me a glass or do this for me. I mean, you're a child. So there was, you know, some of that. So it was a very strict background, but also a very loving and large extended family. So my mom, I told you she was the firstborn. She was the first of 9 children.
Wow.
And so in those days, especially because of things that happened to the family with colonialism and all of that, she ended up being almost like a younger sister. There was only 16 years between her and her mom. So she ended up being almost like a younger sister and really helping her mom, especially after my grandfather, who I had mentioned before, went to Manyani. So they ended up, my grandmother and her sisters, raising their families together, very close. So my grandmother had 3 sisters, so these 4 women who raised the families. My mother was a firstborn to Rebecca, who was her mother, and then the first of 9 children.
Wow.
So she was seen, I told you about a bit of her background. She was expected to go out and find a way for these other younger children. So as soon as you had an education, you got a job, you were expected to come back and put the others through school, help your parents, and not just help them financially, also help them with decisions, with strategy, also be a bit of a safety net, if there were shocks, medical emergencies or accidents, it would be you who's expected to kind of step up and support the family.
What's the difference with that and what happens today? Because that happens today, but people call it black tax. So it's true.
Yeah, it's true.
What's the line between black tax and this? Is it a mindset? I don't know, like that, hence why I'm asking the question.
Yeah, it's a big topic. That's a really good question. I mean, so I think what we can say is that in those days, we had nothing, right? I always have this joke where I say, people talk about generational wealth and they talk about old money. I'm like, in Kenya, there's no old money. All of us, even the most prominent families, were like a generation away from a hut and bare feet, right? We are all just building. And it's very easy to get distracted away from that. If you're in the West, when they talk about old money, they're talking about, 200 years of, property being passed down. But with us, even those who are doing a little bit better, we're all just at the beginning.
1964, for example, for land, literally going from the Queen to your name.
Exactly, to your name was just the other day. And there's people who are still getting their first title deeds now, where land is still being formalized, right? So in light of that, we are coming from a foundation where we had to have a communitarian. And I don't want to say had to have as if it's a curse, really. We had to pool our resources to get ahead. And I think the families that did that effectively saw the results of that. In our family, we pooled, we supported each other across the extended family. And it wasn't just my mother and her sisters, it was also the cousins. And to this day, people pool together. I think it's something about the African tradition that is not a bad thing. It's something we need to look at, because we're seeing that in the West, there is some disintegration of that. If government takes care of everything, there is a role for community, and it creates isolation. It's just you and the government and your social security check.
In a home.
It's good to have a community that steps up for you. I was in Poland last week, as we've said, and I've been really impressed by Poland. I mean, they have, the Berlin Wall fell in 1990, around there. And between that time and now, they have grown progressively at over 4% a year. And I think the average GDP per capita is something like $20,000. I mean, they've done very, very well. But the interesting thing about that is when we were talking, they were saying that there's people who don't have funerals. Like when somebody dies in your family, like you kind of dispose very quickly, you go, you burn the ashes. It's a commercial process. There's no real service. And then your person has died, and then now you have the ashes, and that's done. And at the table, there was quite a debate, because there were some people saying this is really wrong. We're losing our way. Because when you're born, when you reach, you start to transition to adulthood, if you get married, if you have a baby, these are the things that are sacred about humanity. And then when you die, and it's a transition in which your community and your family must walk with you. But once you get to this idea that we're now a wealthy country and now we can just do it on our own, you start to get this thing with disintegration, mental health. You lose that spiritual sacred part, which is the essence and the meaning of being a human being. So I do think that the way that we used to commune and walk with each other is a very beautiful part. And while I'm a big advocate of Africans and Kenyans becoming wealthy, that's actually what I've laid down my life for. I want us all to have money.
Let's be
prosperous. But at the other hand, I don't know that the way that the models we're seeing around the world have to be our way. And I'm wondering if there's a way we can craft a new way of our own that still keeps the family, the spiritual, there, even as we liberate humans. Because I think part of the worry is that those institutions used to oppress people and suppress your individuality. So if we could find a balance, I'd be happier.
You are dropping so many gems. I'm even in awe. I'm like, the brilliance with which you see different perspective. Of course, also because you're well traveled. So sometimes you may be making a decision to go this direction, but you can come and say, I have been here. I have seen what's happening here. Yes, it's working, but there's also this side that's not working.
You need to be aware.
Yeah.
The bitter with the sweet. Huh?
I love it. Okay. CTA for me is like a jigsaw puzzle that I'm putting together of your life.
So we're still in the family.
So now the family, by the way, I see it. I can see you guys at the dinner table. I can see your parents. I can see your mom was really ahead of her time.
That's right.
She was really, really ahead of her time in entering this leadership world. Let me not even call it corporate. Your dad's also, he has the education discipline. So I'm already seeing where you get in some of these traits. I want to put the next jigsaw puzzle in, and that's education. So tell me a little bit about school. What schools did you go to? Where did you start? As far back as you can remember.